On October 7, 2023, Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups orchestrated a deadly attack on Israel. The horrific attack killed 1,200 people, with over 200 hostages seized and over 100 still unaccounted for. Israeli forces began airstrikes and ground operations in response. The ongoing conflict has devastated the civilian population of Gaza. 75% of the population of Gaza has been displaced, most multiple times, and the entire population is in need of humanitarian assistance. The ongoing conflict, bombardment, and blockade has led to catastrophic humanitarian suffering for more than 2 million Palestinians, half of them children, who are now without clean water, food, and vital medical services. According to the United Nations Office for Humanitarian Affairs, which bases its figures on the Gazan Ministry of Health statistics, there have been over 37,000 fatalities of Palestinians. Hamas has reportedly mixed military personnel amongst facilities with civilians. The entire population of Gaza is facing acute insecurity as they are caught up in this conflict. Israeli bombardment and exchange of fire has damaged or destroyed over 60% of Gaza's housing. Persistent restrictions on the flow of humanitarian aid into and around Gaza are driving a desperate shortage of food, fuel, medicine, equipment, and humanitarian staff in Gaza. Hundreds of thousands of people in northern Gaza are largely cut off from aid entirely. An increased amount of aid made it into Gaza during March and April 2024, but those gains have been lost since operations commenced in Rafah, a border crossing that has served as the epicenter of the humanitarian response. Insecurity caused by the fighting also makes it difficult for humanitarian agencies to safely get the aid to affected populations. The danger extends to humanitarian workers. More than 260 aid workers have been killed, over 190 of whom worked for the United Nations. There are also increasing reports of looting and violence around aid delivery. The IRC is calling for an immediate ceasefire as envisaged by the recent UN Security Council resolution. From a humanitarian perspective, a ceasefire is the only way to fully protect Palestinian lives, secure the release of hostages taken from Israel on October 7th, and safely scale up humanitarian assistance. All parties must abide by international humanitarian law. They should immediately take steps to protect civilians and uphold international law. Hamas and other Palestinian groups must release hostages and refrain from launching military attacks from within or close to civilian infrastructure, especially hospitals. All parties must stop using explosive weapons with wide area effects in populated areas. Israel must ensure all military operations across Gaza apply the fundamental principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. The International Rescue Committee and partners in Gaza are delivering emergency and life-saving medical care, including direct medical care in Gaza's few remaining operational hospitals. In addition to distributing medical supplies and pharmaceuticals, the IRC is working with partners to provide food parcels, psychosocial support, protection, and early childhood development programs, including in Gaza's many shelters. The IRC is also starting up direct programming in nutrition, water, and sanitation and protection services. The IRC's response in Gaza draws on our global experience and expertise in emergency response, as well as our long-standing presence in the region. Local partners have been leading the response in Gaza, and we are supporting their objectives through financial, technical, and operational support. The IRC plans to achieve much greater scale in our programming in Gaza as soon as a ceasefire is in place. The IRCs will aim to work directly and through partners to provide health care, nutrition, water, sanitation, and hygiene and protection, particularly focused on separated children. Prior to October 2023, there were 36 hospitals in Gaza. Of those 19 are no longer functional, and only 17 are partially functional. Those few remaining facilities are completely overwhelmed and lack healthcare personnel and basic supplies. Patients are dying from infections, as hospitals are at breaking point due to the skyrocketing demand for medical services. Over half of the water and sanitation facilities in Gaza have been destroyed, leading to an accumulation of 340,000 tons of solid waste. Lack of clean water and sanitation services risks the spread of preventable diseases. The IRC and our partner have deployed 8 successive emergency medical teams to provide emergency and life-saving medical care, including direct medical care at hospitals and the distribution of medical supplies and pharmaceuticals. The team, composed of trauma doctors, surgeons, pediatricians, and disaster experts, are offering surge and relief support to hospitals and providing life-saving medical care to injured Palestinians. To date, our ENTs have delivered at least 384 surgeries and 1,243 consultations, including minor procedures and critical care. The IRC has procured and delivered 46 metric tons of pharmaceuticals and medical supplies, which the IRC and our partners are distributing to support health facilities across Gaza. These include pediatric and psychotropic medicines, as well as trauma supplies, and are based on needs identified and coordinated across health actors working in Gaza. We have partnered with Palestinian NGO Juzer for Health and Social Development to address the health and mental health needs of those displaced and to provide access to basic services for children and families. Together, our 3 mobile health teams have provided more than 10,000 patient consultations in northern Gaza. The teams have been providing health services in 3 shelter clusters in northern Gaza since February. In the first week of March alone, these clinics served almost 7,000 patients, and we expect to reach more than 30,000 in the following months. Even before the increase in hostilities, at least 500,000 children in Gaza needed mental health and psychosocial support. Now, every child, parent, and caregiver in Gaza has experienced profoundly distressing events and trauma, characterized by extensive destruction and displacement. In partnership with ANERA, the IRC is working to provide essential mental health and psychosocial support to Palestinian children. We are utilizing a comprehensive approach that prioritizes the needs of children between the ages of 4 and 18 to implement therapeutic activities, including play, art therapy, and life skills training. Our activities are designed to empower children to cope with their experiences, express themselves creatively, and develop essential life skills for the future, thereby promoting healing, resilience, and emotional well-being. By fostering a safe and supportive environment, we aim to mitigate the long-term impact of the crisis in Gaza. According to this problem, in addition to the legal revenue, the IRC has also partnered with NAFS and begun delivering mental health and psychosocial service MHPSS activities through 6 mobile community centers, 3 in Gaza and 3 in the West Bank. A partnership with NAFS is expected to deliver support to 5,000 children within the next few months. Farmers in Gaza are now unable to produce food. An estimated 80% of cropland has been destroyed in some areas, while 70% of livestock providing meat or dairy products have been killed. Severe shortages of food and clean water mean that the entirety of Gaza's population is facing crisis levels of food insecurity and imminent famine. Recent studies using the International Phase Classification for Food Insecurity found the whole population at crisis levels and nearly 500,000 people at catastrophic levels. Although lack of humanitarian access is likely obscuring the full picture of hunger in Gaza, the UN has reported that children are already dying of hunger. Over 50% of households report no food at home, with more than 20% going entire days without eating. The International Rescue Committee and Welfare Association partnered to combat the severe hunger affecting displaced families in Rafah, southern Gaza, where over 1 million people have been displaced and have sought refuge. Together, we delivered fresh food parcels to approximately 3,500 families between January and February 2024. The environmental impacts of the war in Gaza, exposing the community to rapidly growing soil, water, and air pollution, and risks of irreversible damage to its natural ecosystems. UNEP reiterates the call for an immediate ceasefire to protect lives and eventually help mitigate the conflict's environmental impacts. Not only are the people of Gaza dealing with untold suffering from the ongoing war, the significant and growing environmental damage in Gaza risks locking its people into a painful, long recovery. While many questions remain regarding the exact type and quantity of contaminants affecting the environment in Gaza, people are already living with the consequences of conflict-related damage to environmental management systems and pollution today. Water and sanitation have collapsed. Critical infrastructure continues to be decimated. Coastal areas, soil, and ecosystems have been severely impacted. All of this is deeply harming people's health, food security, and Gaza's resilience, said Inger Anderson, UNEP Executive Director. We urgently need a ceasefire to save lives and restore the environment, to enable Palestinians to start to recover from the conflict and rebuild their lives and livelihoods in Gaza. The conflict undoes recent, albeit limited, progress on Gaza's environmental management systems, including development of water desalination and wastewater treatment facilities. An estimated 39 million tons of debris have been generated by the conflict. For each square meter in the Gaza Strip, there is now over 107 kilograms of debris. This is more than 5 times the quantity of debris generated from the 2017 conflict in Mosul, Iraq. Debris poses risks to human health and the environment, from dust and contamination with unexploded ordnance, asbestos, industrial and medical waste, and other hazardous substances. Human remains buried beneath the debris must be dealt with sensitively and appropriately. Clearing the debris will be a massive and complex task, which needs to start as soon as possible to enable other types of recovery and reconstruction to proceed. The water, sanitation, and hygiene systems are almost entirely defunct. Gaza's 5 wastewater treatment plants have shut down, with sewage contaminating beaches, coastal waters, soil, and fresh water, with a host of pathogens, nutrients, microplastics, and hazardous chemicals. This poses immediate and long-term threats to the health of Gazans, marine life, and arable lands. The solid waste management system is severely damaged. 5 out of 6 solid waste management facilities in Gaza are damaged. By November 2023, 1,200 tons of rubbish were accumulating daily around camps and shelters. A shortage of cooking gas has forced families to burn wood, plastic, and waste instead, endangering women and children in particular. This, coupled with fires and burning fuels, is likely to have sharply lowered Gaza's air quality, though no open-source air quality data is available for Gaza. Munitions containing heavy metals and explosive chemicals have been deployed in Gaza's densely populated areas, contaminating soil and water sources and posing a risk to human health which will persist long after the cessation of hostilities. Unexploded ordnance poses especially serious risks to children. Destruction of solar panels is expected to leak lead and other heavy metals, causing a new kind of risk to Gaza's soil and water. Hamas' tunnel system and Israel's efforts to destroy them may further contribute to environmental damage. Depending on the construction standards of the tunnels and the extent to which water is being pumped into them, the preliminary assessment warns of long-term risks to human health from groundwater contamination and to buildings constructed on limited by the security situation and access restrictions. This is the permission full, the 2023 The authors find that resolving immediate and chronic environmental challenges in Gaza is key for its people's health and must be integrated into recovery and reconstruction plans. An environmental analysis, including assessment of contamination from munitions and other conflict-related pollution, should be an integral part of recovery and reconstruction planning. Rebuilding of Gaza should also address chronic environmental issues that were there before the war. As soon as security conditions allow and access is granted, UNEP expects to undertake a field-based assessment of the extent and type of environmental degradation. Remediation options will be developed in consultation with Gaza's scientific research community, public and private sector professionals, and civil society, including women and youth. This preliminary assessment responds to an official request from the State of Palestine in December 2023. UNEP is mandated to assist countries upon request with pollution mitigation and control in areas affected by armed conflict or terrorism. Pursuant to UN Environment Assembly to UNEA mandates, including resolutions 215s, 3.1s, and 6.12s. Condemning Israel's aggression, noted the Mage observer of various resolutions adopted at the League's meetings at different levels, and said its members are working to prevent the situation deteriorating, expressing concern about the lack of accountability for the violation of Assembly and Council resolutions, calling for an immediate ceasefire. He said this gives credence to the doubts in the Arab world regarding the Council's effectiveness. It must adopt an immediate resolution under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter to ensure that Israel complies with relevant resolutions and the provisional measures of the International Court of Justice, he added. Expressing support for the mediation efforts of Qatar, Egypt, and the United States, he said these efforts continue to lack the necessary political pressure. Israel must stop linking the success of the mediation to individual internal vested interests, he said, adding, "There is nothing further from the truth than Israel's claims that the United Nations has become a forum for anti-Semitism," stressing that it is not anti-Semitic to call for ending the occupation and protecting the Palestinian people from violence. He also condemned Israel's attacks on the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon and Syria. The war in the Gaza Strip continues to have severe adverse effects on Palestinians and their economy. In addition, widespread destruction of infrastructure has taken place. According to UNRWA, some 75% of Gaza's population were displaced as of 5 February 2024. Geospatial assessments in the Gaza Strip show damage to 34% of arable land and most of the infrastructure of the agri-food sector. 6, the West Bank has also been deeply affected by the hostilities. According to OCHA, more than 385 Palestinians have been killed and 4,500 injured. Breaking into the worst, with many states, the implications of the ongoing hostilities on the OPT economy are grave. The PCVS estimated a sharp contraction of the OPT's gross domestic product by a third during the fourth quarter of 2023 compared to the same quarter of 2022. The devastation brought upon the Gaza Strip's economy, as well as the disruption to the West Bank's everyday economic life, has led to substantial losses in employment and livelihoods. The near full destruction of establishments in the Gaza Strip has already shattered its labor market. In the West Bank, a survey of employers conducted by the ILO in January 2024 indicates that 99% of participating establishments experienced adverse impacts due to Israeli measures implemented since October 2023. More than 97% of these establishments witnessed a drop in monthly turnover, and nearly half temporarily laid off workers. The SME were notably hard hit by the deteriorating economic conditions because some interviewed establishments reported in Figure 3. This new estimate now reflects an assumed reduction, a reduction in public sector employment by 15% and the complete loss of employment for the 20,000 Gazans previously. This new estimate is an upward revision to the job loss estimate in Bulletin Number when we wrote. 2. With further Israeli military operations expected in southern Gaza, the job losses will likely rise further. In addition to the impact on workers from the Gaza Strip, most of the 171,000 workers from the West Bank, who previously worked in Israel and the settlements, have lost their jobs. Only around 10,000 of these workers are reported to have worked in the Israeli economy in January 2024, as reported by the Palestinian Ministry of Labor. This amounts to around 6% of the total number of West Bank Palestinians who worked in Israel and the settlements pre-conflict. Given the escalating violence in the West Bank and its impact on supply chains, production capacities, and workers' access to their workplaces, losses in private sector employment in the West Bank are revised upward to 25%. This translates into a total loss of 306,000 jobs in the West Bank. Importantly, however, the depletion of income for Palestinian workers extends beyond job losses alone. Israel's decision to withhold from Palestinian customs duties the amounts the Palestinian Authority was using to pay civil servants in Gaza and the subsequent refusal by the Palestinian Authority to accept the reduced treatment. As a result, public sector employees have only received partial wage payments. In January 2024, public sector employees received only 60% of their wages. Additionally, according to the ILO survey of workers conducted in January 2024, and some anecdotal evidence, when the government actually worked in the Gaza Strip, the assumption is that 60% of the remaining workers in the private sector have experienced a 40% reduction in their labor income. Considering these different income reductions, along with those resulting from complete job losses, Table 2 provides estimates of the total income losses, currently estimated at $25.5 million per day. Even if you aren't paying $124, it would have a pretty slight changes with US dollars. And then accused of economic news them. If you aren't playing American injury, promptly bust. In order to project the impact of the war in the Gaza Strip on the labor market of the OPT during the first quarter 2024 and the year 2024 as a whole, an extended version of a PCBS forecasting model was utilized. The projections assume two scenarios. The first presumes that hostilities will continue for 3 months into 2024 until March 2024. The second assumes that hostilities will continue for 6 months into 2024 until June 2024. The model has the capacity to forecast outcomes for the OPT as one unit, but not for the West Bank and Gaza Strip separately. Under the second scenario, these rates decline by 3.6 percentage points and by 1.2 percentage points respectively, suggesting growing discouragement among job seekers. These estimates represent a significant decline in male and female labor force participation rates, since it typically takes years for the propensity to engage in the labor market to change by such magnitude. For instance, it took more than 30 years for the female labor force participation to grow from its low level of 11% in the early 1990s to its current levels. Along with this decline in labor force participation rates, the unemployment rate is projected to rise by 12 percentage points under the first scenario, and by 15 percentage points in the second scenario. As a result, the total number of unemployed individuals in the OPT is projected to exceed 600,000, reaching almost 650,000 under the second scenario. Rising unemployment rates are likely to exert downward pressure on daily wages, which are projected to decline by 7% under the first scenario and by 9% under the second scenario in 2024. Table 3 projected labor market indicators for the year 20. Beyond the impact at the aggregate level, the model has also provided projections on the changing structural composition of employment, as shown in Figure 5 below. In the industrial sector, employment is forecast to decline significantly. The impact is greater the longer the conflict continues. This decline is primarily due to the damage inflicted on the means of production in Gaza, alongside disruptions to supply chains and transportation challenges across the West Bank resulting from Israeli measures. In the services sector, employment is projected to decline more substantially under the first scenario compared to the second. This is primarily because workers who lose their jobs in other sectors are likely to transition to self-employment within this sector the longer the conflict is prolonged. This is supported by the interviews conducted with workers who have recently lost their jobs, many of whom have reported turning to self-employment in the services sector. However, it will decrease compared to 2023 if hostilities extend into June 2024. This can be attributed to the sector's ability to provide an immediate cushion to economic shocks, while often not being regarded as a source of long-term employment. As for workers in the construction sector, they expectedly experience more pronounced job losses the longer the war continues, reflecting the sector's vulnerability to disruptions and damage to infrastructure. Labor market outcomes in the OPT are estimated to have deteriorated even further as the hostilities have continued. Loss of life, destruction of buildings and other infrastructure, disruptions to supply chain networks, increasing transport costs and other adverse impacts are continuing to exert a heavy toll on the labor market. Unemployment rates are projected to rise, wage levels to decrease, and employment across sectors to alter. The consequent income losses endured by workers and employers continues to be substantial. Yet it is evident that the longer the war continues, the more these labor market outcomes will worsen. Reversing these negative trends requires both economic and political interventions. Ending the ongoing hostilities and lifting Israeli restrictions on the West Bank are essential first step. Once this is achieved, plans for rebuilding the Gaza Strip's economy and restoring the West Bank's economy should be considered. These plans should prioritize economic measures that not only generate growth, but also protect incomes and create decent jobs for the Palestinian people. New Zealand has announced 5 tranches of support to the humanitarian response, totaling $22 million, to address urgent humanitarian needs in response to the Israel-Hamas conflict. $4.5 million to the United Nations Children's Fund, and $720 million to the United Nations 2720 mechanism for Gaza. The ministry has been informed by the World Food Programme that emergency food funded by New Zealand was part of aid looted from a Gaza warehouse in January 2024. Catastrophic hunger is widespread in Gaza, and there is insufficient aid getting in. The World Food Programme is a long-standing humanitarian partner for New Zealand. It's an experienced and principled humanitarian actor with a demonstrated ability to deliver at scale in complex environments. It has strong systems and controls to guard against diversion and to ensure that assistance reaches intended civilian beneficiaries. The World Food Programme's response in Gaza is critical, reaching around 1 million people each month, and New Zealand is pleased to support its work. This $22 million in humanitarian funding is separate to New Zealand's $1 million annual core contribution to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. New Zealand believes there can be no military solution to the current conflict. Early action to revive the Middle East peace process is critical, and we will continue to call on the parties to return to the negotiating table urgently in an effort to work towards a two-state solution. New Zealand's long-standing position is that this is the best path for a durable and lasting peace in the region. New Zealand's established approach to the Middle East peace process includes support for a comprehensive and sustainable two-state solution, support for a right to existent one, and support for the UN and aid agencies say Gaza is suffering severe shortages of food and other essentials, including fuel and medicine. This is particularly acute in northern Gaza, where it is especially difficult to deliver aid, which enters the territory from the south. A UN-backed report says the situation across Gaza is turning into a man-made famine. A number of children have starved to death in northern Gaza, the UN says. Humanitarian agencies and Israel have blamed each other. Agencies say Israeli security checks on aid going into Gaza are complex and arbitrary, causing major delays. Israel denies impeding aid and says agencies are failing to distribute the aid that is allowed in. However, Israel has agreed to open a crossing into northern Gaza and allow its nearby port of Ashdod to receive shipments of aid after sharp criticism from the U.S. An internationally backed plan for peace is known as the two-state solution. It would mean an independent Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, with East Jerusalem as its capital. And this Palestinian state would exist alongside Israel. Israel's most important ally, the U.S., sees a two-state solution as the way forward once the Gaza war ends. A two-state solution is also formally supported by the PA. However, since 1967, Israel has built about 140 settlements, housing some 700,000 Jews in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The settlements are regarded as illegal by most of the rest of the world, though Israel disputes this. The PA insists all settlements must be removed as part of any future peace deal. The idea of a two-state solution has never been officially advocated by Israel, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has repeatedly stated his opposition. He says Israel must retain full security control over the West Bank and Gaza. Most of the 253 men, women, and children abducted by Hamas were civilians. They included elderly people and those with disabilities and medical conditions. The youngest was 9 months old. In Gaza, Hamas hid them in tunnels and fighters' homes. Unconfirmed reports suggest some have been held by other militant groups. During November's truce, 105 hostages, 81 Israelis and dual nationals, and 24 foreigners, were released in exchange for 240 Palestinians held in Israeli jails. 4 hostages had previously been freed by Hamas, and 3 rescued by the IDF-1 on October 21st, and 2 on the 12th of February. 3 hostages were accidentally killed by Israeli troops, who mistook them for Hamas fighters. In the Gaza Strip, the atmosphere of heightened tension led to an increase in rocket attacks on Israel by the PIJ and other Palestinian militants. Those had been relatively infrequent since the 2012 ceasefire. But by late June 2014, rocket launches and Israeli reprisals had become a daily occurrence. On June 30th, in response to these reprisals, Hamas fired its first rockets into Israel since the ceasefire. On July 8th, Israel commenced a large-scale offensive in the Gaza Strip, using aerial bombing, missiles, and mortar fire to destroy a variety of targets that it claimed were associated with militant activity. After more than a week of bombardment failed to halt rocket fire from the Gaza Strip, Israeli forces launched a ground assault to destroy tunnels and other elements of the militants' infrastructure. In early August, Israeli leaders declared that the ground operation had fulfilled its mission, and Israeli troops and tanks pulled back from the Gaza Strip. Israeli airstrikes continued, as did rocket and mortar attacks on Israel from the Gaza Strip. After agreeing to several short-term ceasefires over the course of the conflict, Israeli and Palestinian leaders reached an open-ended ceasefire in late August. In exchange for the cessation of rocket fire from the Gaza Strip, Israel agreed to loosen restrictions on goods entering the Gaza Strip, expand the fishing zone off the coast, and reduce the size of the security buffer it enforced in areas adjacent to the Israeli border. Despite the high Palestinian death toll, estimated at more than 2,100, and widespread destruction in the Gaza Strip, Hamas leaders declared victory, trumpeting their ability to withstand Israeli attacks. A series of border protests in Gaza in 2018, in which demonstrators attempted to cross the border into Israel and sent incendiary kites and balloons into Israel, was met with a violent response by Israel. The situation reached a peak on May 14th, when about 40,000 people participated in the protests. Many of the protesters attempted to cross the border at once, and Israeli soldiers opened fire, killing about 60 people and wounding some 2,700 others. The violence continued to escalate, leading to Israeli airstrikes and Hamas rocket fire into Israel. The fighting lasted several months and ended with a truce in November. Discussions for maintaining peace remained ongoing in the following years, even during periods of escalation, and led to the occasional easing of restrictions on the Gaza Strip. On June 25, 2006, Palestinian militants, some affiliated with Hamas, infiltrated the Israeli border and launched an attack on Israeli army positions near the border crossing at Kerem Shalom, killing 2 Israeli soldiers and wounding 4 others. Shalit, also wounded in the course of the raid, was abducted to the Gaza Strip, where he was subsequently held in an undetermined location. Terms for a prisoner exchange were expressed shortly after Shalit's capture. Hamas demanded the release of some 1,000 Palestinian prisoners being held in Israeli jails in exchange for Shalit's freedom. No agreement was reached, however, and Israeli assaults meant to secure Shalit's release were likewise unsuccessful. Shalit's welfare was unclear until September 2006, when a handwritten letter was delivered to his parents. The handwriting was confirmed to be Shalit's, although the content appeared to have been dictated. In June 2007, an audio recording of Shalit was released, and 2 other letters were subsequently delivered. In a deal mediated by Egyptian and German officials, Israel agreed in October 2009 to release 20 female Palestinian prisoners in exchange for video footage of Shalit. The footage, in which Shalit read a prepared statement greeting his family and appealing for his release, was subsequently made public. Aside from the periodic letters and recordings, however, Shalit was held incommunicado. Throughout Shalit's captivity, his parents continued to advocate for their son's freedom and maintained his plight at the forefront of public and political concerns in Israel. In mid-2010, just after the 4th anniversary of Shalit's capture, his family, accompanied by a growing crowd that eventually amounted to tens of thousands of supporters, embarked on a 12-day. The march culminated in a rally in Jerusalem, where Shalit's parents pledged to hold a sit-in outside the official residence of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu until Shalit was released. On October 18, 2011, following an agreement by Israel that secured Shalit's freedom in exchange for the release of more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, Shalit was released.